morning, somewhere in the Italian Alps, in a little village very remotely on a high hill. And the sun was shining from a blue cloudless sky, and it was so quiet that you could hear the crickets chirping. I know, none of this sounds remarkable, and yet it was a very special day for me. There, in the big garden of a small hotel, under the shadow of a tree, I and 3 other child caretakers were waiting for the arrival of our families. I say our families because already beforehand we had decided for which families we would be responsible. And so this was about 10 years ago. I was just before my senior high school year, and I had been offered the job as a family caretaker for summer camps of families with hearing impaired children and teenagers. As back then I was very convinced that I wanted to become a kindergarten teacher, I had happily accepted these offers. Also, I was 17 and I really needed to earn a few bucks. So there I was, standing in the shadow of a tree and waiting a little bit nervously. And so I went through all the information I had received beforehand about my families. Only the thought of my second family, though, made me stand up and wander around nervously. It was a mom and her 2 boys. One 8 years old, the other, Francisco, 5 years old. He was hearing impaired and had a cochlear implant. He had severe communication deficits and was non-verbal. He had some motor disabilities, and he was autistic. You should know that never before had I met an autistic child, and the thought of working with him was terrifying. Terrifying simply because I didn't know how to work with a child that could not talk. So I was standing there a little bit sweaty, walking around, and the first car started to arrive, and the mountain quiet was soon filled with laughing, crying, screaming voices, hands were shaking, and names introduced. My first family arrived, and then Nadia, the mom, and her 2 boys drove up. She started to introduce her kids, and Francisco was standing there, gazing somewhere over my left shoulder into the distance. He was this big boy, wearing Harry Potter glasses with blue frames, and he gave no sign whatsoever of having noticed my presence. That wasn't very flattering, so I tried to shake his hand, and he quickly pulled it away, still observing something in the distance that I couldn't see. And so the week started. In the mornings, the kids would attend music therapy, and the other ones would just play with us. We had prepared loads of games. They would cook grass soups or just enjoy the time with their parents. In the afternoon, the parents would leave for a couple of hours. They would go for a group hike or walk to the village to exchange stories, experiences, and eventually build new friendships. While the parents were gone, we would spend most of our times outside in the garden. You know, play games, sing songs, craft animals from paper rolls, and then in the evening, after dinner, when the kids were put to bed, we would sit on the terrace. Honestly, there was nothing else to do in this little mountain village, and we would enjoy the returned silence of the mountains, observe the stars, and discuss the day, talk about whatever, and just relax. I have to say that I really enjoyed my time there, but I was struggling. I was struggling because I had a very hard time to connect with Francisco. I really tried my best to include him in group activities and try to make it a fun time for him as well, but very often these attempts failed. First of all, because I did not manage to catch his attention, and secondly, because I sometimes misinterpreted his wishes, and that would lead to some aggressive outbursts from his side. Luckily, I had an easy time to connect with Nadia, his mom. So in the evenings we would just sit there, I would tell her about my afternoon with Francisco, and we would exchange ideas and thoughts, and she would soon also start to give me a very, personal insight and unique insight into their daily lives, and about how worried she was about Francisco and about his future, and how she didn't know what caused his condition. And also because she was pregnant again, so not knowing whether or not something she might have done during her pregnancy was really troubling for her. Now, one day, the air thickened and a huge thunderstorm came roaring up the valley. And believe me, this was a nightmare because the kids had just eaten a truckload of ice cream and the parents were gone off to a copper mine somewhere in the village. And we were there outside, the first drops were falling on the ground, sort of exploding water bombs. And so we grabbed as much handicraft materials as we could and we ran inside, and we had to spend the whole afternoon in a little restaurant of this hotel with 25 sugar-high kids because they had just eaten a truckload of ice cream. And there we were, sort of worried about what to do next, and then luckily one of my colleagues had a life-saving idea. We had bagged face paint for emergency cases. This was one of these emergency cases. So we told the kids that they could be whatever they wanted to be and that we would try to paint their faces accordingly. And then we were painting, butterflies, cowboys, the usual things that kids are coming up with. And there were more exotic things like a turtle or a Spider-Man. And then eventually, it was a girl's turn. And she wanted to be a whale tree. Yes, that was my reaction. A whale tree, half a whale, half a tree. And there I was sitting, I'm like, okay, I really don't know how to draw half a whale, half a tree, so I needed to gain some time. So I turned around and pretended to look for something very busily. And that's when my eyes fell on Francisco. He had found some crayons and a sheet of paper and was now very focused drawing the Spider-Man I just minutes ago had painted on a boy's face. And the boy was standing in front of him, grinning from one ear to the other, very much excited about the attention he got. And I couldn't believe my eyes, because first of all, I'd never seen Francisco do anything like that. And secondly, he voluntarily interacted with another child. It felt like a window into a hidden world had opened up to me. It made me realize that there was so much more going on in Francisco's mind and that he could be and do so much more than my first impression would have suggested. It entirely changed my impression of this kid. And so, as any good child caretaker would do, I turned around and pretended that nothing happened and finally painted that whale tree. Yeah, in the end it really mostly looked like a rock and a bush, but whatever. So, from that moment on, I would make sure that there were some pencils around and crayons around and sheets of paper so that whenever Francisco wanted to, he could just start to paint. And he sometimes did and sometimes did not, but this fundamentally changed our relationship as I started to feel a little bit more secure about what I was actually doing. So today, I am not a kindergarten teacher. I am a neuroscience PhD student. And this experience with Francisco and some other things that happened during that time have changed my path into a way where I now eventually ended up studying the molecular and cellular mechanisms that underlie autism. And having spent this time on this mountain with Nadia and Francisco really still changes my perspective of my work. As a researcher, science can be tricky sometimes. Experiments sometimes fail, it can be frustrating, it can be boring because you're counting cells. And I had this one professor who once told me, molecular biology always works. Yeah, that's not true. Yeah. So eventually when you're coming in on Sunday evening, you just want to change the media and feed your cells, and then you see them floating around dead in the media and you're like, what did I do wrong? And you're starting troubleshooting problems that you never expected to have beforehand. And these are the moments when you start losing or seeing the point of what you do, because it just seems too big and too difficult. And thinking of Francisco and Nadia helps me to realize that there is a bigger picture and there is something important about my work. And so I am really grateful for this few days somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the mountains, because they let me be part of their stories. And this story still helps me understand what I do today.